everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is one of my colleagues, Emily Baker White. She is an investigative reporter who covers TikTok. Emily, thanks so much for joining me.
Happy to be here as always.
I want to read the headline from your most recent report. It says this: TikTok won't say if it's giving ICE your data. And that's alarming for some people to hear because, I read that and I didn't even know that that was an option, that social media companies were just willy-nilly handing over your data. A, is that true? What are other social media companies doing? And B, does this mean that they are just handing over everyone's data to ICE?
So, social media companies can't hand over data willy-nilly in the United States because of something called the Stored Communications Act, which is a federal law that sort of lays out how companies that hold our communications, and this law dates back to 1986. It was probably more intended for phone providers than it was even for internet platforms, but here we are. The Stored Communications Act sort of lays out the types of data sharing that are allowed between platforms and the government. And there are sort of two main types of ways that the government can try to get your information. They can do that in the sort of traditional manner. They go to a judge. They say, Judge, we want a warrant for this thing. It's the same way they would get a warrant to, come into your house and search your house. And the judge will either say, yes, they've met the requirements to get that warrant, or the judge will say, no, actually, you need to do more investigation before you can sort of invade someone's privacy this way. The second way that the government can try to get your information is through something called an administrative warrant, which is a warrant that hasn't gone before a judge, but that is signed by a law enforcement officer, or in this case, a DHS or ICE official. And those warrants are more limited, right? Because they haven't gone before a judge, but they do still exist. And we know now that DHS and ICE have served administrative warrants to at least some tech companies. This has happened to Meta a couple times recently. And the way that played out was Meta got these warrants for people who were posting about ICE, sort of tracking ICE agents' movements and things like that. And Meta told the people behind the accounts that their information was being requested. And those people then ran into court and said, this is an overbroad subpoena. This is, you shouldn't turn over this data right now. And in those couple of cases, those people were successful. And judges said, okay, yeah, Meta, don't turn over any more information unless and until I, the judge, tell you to.
I want to talk about exactly how TikTok changed their policy. I want to read a line from your reporting. You wrote this: earlier this year, TikTok quietly changed its policies about when and how it would share data with governments. I want to talk about that when and the how because those are obviously the most important components here. What were they initially, and how did the when and how change now?
Yeah, so in TikTok's law enforcement guidelines, which is part of their policies, they used to say it is our policy to notify TikTok users before disclosing their data to law enforcement, unless one of a couple of exceptions took place. Now they say, where required by law, we will notify TikTok users if we disclose their data. We may not provide such notice, and then they list their exceptions again. And the language isn't that different, but it's different in a few important ways. First of all, the old language said that they would notify users before disclosing their data. The new language says they'll notify users if they disclose their data. If you're a user who wants to fight whether that disclosure should happen, you're going to need to know before it happens in order to run into court to try to prevent disclosure from happening. So the change from before to if really stuck out to me. And again, it's worth noting that these policies apply beyond the United States. And in the United States, the Stored Communications Act does require notice to users in certain circumstances. And so here we have laws that set all this out. But in other jurisdictions where there isn't a law as much on point, this could have an even bigger impact for people where other governments, maybe more authoritarian governments, are seeking information about users. Those users could be in real harm if they don't know that the government is seeking that data, and they might not find out because of the new change of policy.
So just looking at America before we look internationally, I know that the before was changed to if. Does anyone know right now if their data was turned over to DHS or any other office or department in the government?
From TikTok?
From TikTok.
Not so far as I know. And so I started this reporting before I even found that the language had been changed. I started this reporting by reaching out to all the tech companies and saying, "Hi, what's your policy on administrative warrants? Are you sharing data with ICE? Do you have a policy about sharing data with ICE?" I blitzed them all. Most of them, I heard something back and I was able to pull up the policies and look at them all. TikTok, radio silence. And so I went and looked at their policy and I saw that it was a little narrower than some of its competitors, especially on notice. And then I went and saw that the policy had been recently changed. And so that's how we got here. But TikTok just wouldn't answer my questions about when and how it would share data with ICE. And the more times I asked and the more times they ghosted me, the more I was like, what is happening here? And to this day, they have now acknowledged the story. They asked us to add a comment to the story where they said we were sort of sensationalizing the facts, but they still didn't answer our questions about under which circumstances they will share data with ICE and whether they are doing so right now. And I wish they would answer that question.
I think in these types of situations, I mean, does no answer mean that yes, they are sharing it? Why would a company not say no?
Um, I won't say that no answer means no. It could have a number of other confusing rationales. I think TikTok is in a very tough spot right now because they are trying to negotiate this sale with the Trump administration. They certainly are incentivized not to piss the Trump administration off. So that might be feeding into their rationale about which questions to answer. It's also complicated because there are limited situations in which if a judge tells TikTok they have to turn over data to ICE, then like there's not a lot they can do about it, right? And that's why I didn't just ask like, are you or have you shared data with ICE? But what is your policy about this? Under what circumstances would you share the data? And they didn't answer those questions either. And so I understand that there may be some legal nuance about when and how these companies can share data with ICE, but I see TikTok's competitors trying to get out in the open and say it is our policy to do this. When we receive these, requests, we do that. And TikTok has tried to do that too, right? They have a policy, but they're not explaining why they changed their policy. And I really wish they would answer our questions.
And I think that you touched on this, but I want to talk more about the timing of this change. It happened this year, the beginning of President Trump's second term. Does it have anything to do with the Trump administration? Would it have mattered whoever was in office they were changing this? Is it because there was a lot of questions on will TikTok permanently be banned? Won't TikTok permanently banned? Is it because of the sale? I mean, what do you think about the timing?
So the changes were made on April 25th, 2025. At that time, TikTok had been very close to a deal, or ByteDance had been very close to a deal to sell off part of US TikTok. President Trump had then escalated tensions with the Chinese government over tariffs, and that deal had been put on ice. Um, we don't know why they updated their policies at this time. And if I told you I knew, I would be lying. So I don't. And there are a lot of things that could have gone into it. Maybe there were scuffles with other governments that contributed to them making this change. What we do know is that when they made the change, the Trump administration was ramping up a huge push through ICE and DHS, but also through other agencies like, Brendan Carr at the FTC, right? Like various organs of the government began trying to surveil people and like understand people's movements, especially undocumented people's movements. And B, started trying to exert power over private companies in ways that we hadn't seen in a really long time. And so the fact that this change was made, causation aside, during that moment in US politics, I think is notable because of the ways that the government might have interpreted the change.
And I'm curious, when they give over data, what exactly is that information? Is it your identity if you have a private account or an anonymous account? Is it your IP address? I mean, what really does that look like?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the subpoena. In recent cases where administrative subpoenas were sent to Meta, DHS and ICE were trying to unmask anonymous account holders who were posting about ICE, tracking ICE, trying to figure out who the officers were, trying to figure out where they were going. And that the sort of information that they were seeking about those people were their names, their email addresses, their IP addresses, which provides a rough approximation of location. Um, it is possible that with more process and with a judicial warrant, they could get much more than that, even. They could get the contents of your DMs, right? They could get it, theoretically even your TikTok watch history, maybe. But those things would probably have to come with a judicial warrant. Through this sort of non judicial administrative warrant, they're generally requesting identity information.
And then when you're looking at this as a user of a social media platform, and especially a user of TikTok, I mean, do you think that this really has a chilling effect? Is it more par for the course? When you're signing up and making a platform, making an account rather, are you essentially just signing away your right to the privacy of your data?
Yeah, so when you communicate using a digital platform, your communications aren't just between you and the other person unless they're end-to-end encrypted. They're between you, the person you're talking to, and the company in charge of the platform that you're operating on. And it's really important to sort of know that when you're having conversations. If a platform has communications, usually the government can try to get those communications. And certainly if they go before a judge and the judge allows them to, usually they can get those communications. And so I would just say, are when you have conversations through tech giants, be aware that those tech giants have your communications unless they are end-to-end encrypted. And that would be things like Signal, WhatsApp. Stores a lot of data about sort of who you talk to in your account, but they don't have your communications themselves. And I think if you're doing things on these tech platforms that aren't end-to-end encrypted, you should know that the government might try to come for your communications, and they have to stand up a reason, right? Especially if they're going through a judge, they have to prove that they have good reason to want to look into your communications. But they can try to get them, and sometimes they will be able to get them. And in the case of TikTok here, sometimes you might not even know if they're trying to get them.
And TikTok, as we know, isn't just used by Americans, it is an app that's used worldwide. How have you seen this play out in other countries? Is TikTok there handing over data to the government?
This is a problem that all platforms face around the world because various governments will come and will try to get information. And this last played out for TikTok in Indonesia. There were protests. The protests turned violent. Uh, TikTok actually, they suspended their live streaming feature for a while, and they said they did that because they just didn't want to contribute to tensions. But then, sounds like something might have been going on those live streams because the government demanded data from TikTok about the people who were live streaming before TikTok turned off live streaming. And initially, TikTok said no. They came back to the government and they said that their internal policies said that they wouldn't be able to disclose some of this data. And then the Indonesian government suspended TikTok's license to operate in the country. TikTok stayed online, but it could have been forced offline by the government. And a few days later, the government announced that TikTok had turned over the data that they requested. The government also said that data was anonymized. So, in theory, it couldn't be used to go after individual people. Whether it was sufficiently anonymized, we're relying on reports from the Indonesian government here now. So, who knows? But TikTok did turn over data and they lifted the suspension of the license. So, TikTok was able to keep operating.
And I think that this is really interesting that this wasn't even the initial intent of your story. You were asking all different social media giants, tech companies, their answer, and you got a different answer from TikTok than all of them. That answer
I got no
being
answer from
initially,
TikTok.
yes, radio
Yeah.
silence. That was the answer. So I'm curious how this puzzle piece do you think fits into the larger story here, or your larger story of covering TikTok for years?
You know, I really wish they had engaged with us. And I hope they engage with us next time. I was not necessarily, I didn't set out to report about TikTok here, but TikTok was, radio silent where others weren't. And its policies had quirks that I wanted to understand. Its policies had updates I wanted to understand. And I really tried to understand them. And, you know, I don't I don't know why the company chose not to talk to us, but Um, I hope they choose to talk to us next time, is what I'll say.
Well, Emily, per usual, thank you so much for your reporting. Until next time.
Thank you so much.